Decatur High School, September 17, 1999. A fight broke out at a football game between students of rival gangs. A month later, the school board voted to suspend the 7 students who were involved for 2 years, resulting in a local outcry that amassed over 1,000 protesters. They marched on the school and gathered to listen to speakers and demand justice. With the help of Reverend Jesse Jackson and PUSH, 6 families filed a lawsuit against the district. They claim procedural impropriety, harsh punishment, and racial bias. Here is the Reverend addressing the crowd.
The parents will fight for their children, and that's a good and noble thing, and so we shall now go forward.
He was later arrested.
What's your message, Reverend?
This event sparked a national debate on disparities in disciplinary action towards minorities.
Maybe it was wrong, maybe it was right, but they can't back down. What kind of message is that going to send?
The police has a job to do, but Reverend Jackson, he also has a point to make. And his point is these kids should be in school. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
20 years later, we are still having that same conversation. Racial and ethnic minorities are disciplined at rates that are disproportionately higher than their white peers. A study done by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights found that suspension rates of African American students occur at rates 3 to 4 times higher than the average rate of all students. These disparities are present in almost every school in our nation. This is Tom Lovelace talking about the latest Brown Center report on American education.
My name's Tom Lovelace. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Brown Center at the Brookings Institution. One of the concerns of using out-of-school suspensions is that there is a large racial disparity associated with suspensions, and that is African American students are disproportionately suspended from school.
Many people argue that students of color behave worse than their white peers, but a 2018 study that compared the types of infractions of African American and white students found no obvious differences in severity of behavior, but that African American students tended to be referred to the office for more discretionary offenses. Still, people like Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, with the support of conservative advocates, recently began to take steps to recede Obama-era education reforms. One of these advocates is Michael Petrilli. Petrilli has expressed doubt over the extent of racial bias in discipline and has argued for the removal of federal discipline guidelines.
This was a very contentious debate, a lot of discussion, took that tie-breaking vote from Mike Pence. Yeah. But now we have Betsy DeVos as U.S. Education Secretary. What should we expect?
I think we can expect a couple of things. First, she has made it very clear that she agrees with the Republicans in Capitol Hill that we need to give power back to the states and to local communities when it comes to education. And I think that Betsy DeVos is very much going to be someone who, when asked about this policy issue or that policy issue, she's going to say, well, go talk to your governor. That's not my decision to make.
A study published in the Journal of Social Problems shows that the discipline gap could be a key reason so many black children fall behind their white peers academically. Here is Judith Brown Dianis, the Executive Director of Advancement Project.
If you want to keep kids on track academically, you can't suspend them because they were truant. I didn't go to school, so now you're going to give me a suspension because I didn't go to school. Thank you very much. You cannot suspend kids for talking back to a teacher, okay? There has got to be a different way of addressing these issues in our schools.
One of the most consistent findings of modern education research is the strong positive relationship between time engaged in academic learning and student achievement. Results suggest students who had been suspended perform worse on end-of-year exams and are less likely to graduate. Particularly for our African American students in our data, the unequal suspension rate is one of the most important factors hindering academic progress and maintaining the racial gap in achievement. In today's schools, black and brown students are not only faced with excessive punishment, but they are excessively policed, especially compared to their white peers. They are often severely punished for minor infractions ranging from dress code, vandalism, disrupting the classroom, and minor fights. Black and brown children are criminalized from an early age and throughout the school system pushed on a pathway to low academic achievement, high dropout rates, and prison. If you look at these statistics, you see a shocking trend that explains why we see videos like these on the news and on social media.
And on one of the officers, the cop grabs him by the throat and takes him to the floor.
Here is Judith Brown Dionys, the Executive Director of Advancement Project, addressing the Senate on September 8, 2011.
We have a discipline crisis in this country that must be ended. Suspension rates nearly doubled in the past 30 years. Treating students like criminals does not make sense. Zero-tolerance policies do not make our schools safer. Suspensions, expulsions, and arrests are disproportionately borne by young people of color, students with disabilities, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth.
Alright, sorry for switching up the format. I have a concussion, and honestly I just need to get this project done and stop staring at computer screens. I'm going to talk about some solutions to this problem that I've previously highlighted. So there are organizations working to close the discipline gap and improve the educational experience for minorities in America. The American Federation for Teachers is one of them. They have looked at the research and come up with a list of changes that they believe are necessary and would have a positive impact on school discipline disparities. Some of their guidelines include increased community involvement, educate and train your employees, restore critical school personnel, so like counselors, psychologists, and nurses, implement alternatives to suspension and expulsion. They stressed reviewing and monitoring existing codes to ensure that they are actually being implemented correctly, because that is a major problem. You think your codes are working, but they're really not. For whatever reason, maybe it's that you don't know how to communicate with students of color, maybe you're just racist. In January 2014, the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice jointly issued legal guidance in the form of a Dear Colleague letter. They laid out guidelines for schools and administrators to follow in order to work to close these gaps. The problem with that is, as I mentioned before, Betsy DeVos is considering rolling back those guidelines, but that would still put the responsibility in the hands of the states, and states can still implement these guidelines on a legal basis. There are school districts like Chicago and Baltimore that have seen a 30 to 40% drop in suspensions and referrals to law enforcement because they have used these guidelines laid out, and they've also used the help of people like Judith and the Advancement Project to pinpoint where their systems aren't working. And in the case of Baltimore, they completely redid the discipline code, and they have seen amazing results. The facts are stark. Over the past 2 decades, zero-tolerance policies have disproportionately affected students of color, particularly African Americans, a trend that starts as early as preschool. The policies are promoted by people who had hoped they could standardize discipline procedures and prevent other students from being disrupted in the classroom, but data has shown that these policies have failed. They failed to make schools safer, and they're effectively harming minority students. They have made our schools inequitable to levels that are unimaginably unacceptable, and it is beyond time for change. I just wanted to record this ahead of my video to let you guys know why I chose to do this project. So in middle school, between 7th and 8th grade, I got suspended once, and I had 81 detentions. They were all for minor infractions, ranging from chewing gum in class to talking back to the teacher to instigating class disruptions. A lot of things that I found other kids were being suspended for today, and it didn't even occur to me that it was because of a racial bias, and it didn't occur to me that it had anything to do with this discipline gap.